Esteban Ocon walked into Haas expecting a clean slate, but he just hit an invisible iron wall. Toyota Gazoo Racing's technical partnership with the American squad has officially triggered a severe internal data quarantine that cuts the race drivers out of critical engineering loops. What looks like a massive commercial coup from the outside is quietly turning into an operational nightmare for the men behind the steering wheel. Formula One is a war of milliseconds won inside server racks long before a car touches asphalt. When a mega corporation plugs its resources into a lean midfield outfit, power shifts overnight. If you want weekly deep dives that expose the hidden regulatory warfare and corporate power plays behind the paddock curtain, subscribe now and hit the bell. Tell me in the comments, is Toyota setting Haas up for podium contention, or are they turning the team into a corporate lab rat? Let's pull back the curtain on how this data lockdown actually works. To understand why this data quarantine exists, you have to look at the financial and intellectual property framework governing modern Formula One. Under Appendix 6 of the FIA Formula One Financial and Technical Regulations, the rules around listed team components and outsourcing are brutally strict. A constructor must retain exclusive ownership and operational control over specific intellectual property, primarily the aerodynamic surfaces, survival cell, and overall performance architecture. When Toyota signed their multi-year technical agreement with Gene Haas and Ayao Komatsu, alarm bells rang across the paddock. Rival teams immediately ran to the FIA demanding clarity. How could a global automotive giant provide manufacturing, simulation, and personnel resources to an independent constructor without violating the aerodynamic testing restrictions and the cost cap? The answer was cold corporate compartmentalization. Toyota and Haas built a legal firewall so thick that light barely passes through it. Toyota engineers operating out of Cologne, Germany, work on simulation models, composite manufacturing, and computer-aided engineering pipelines. But under the governance structure agreed with the FIA to avoid joint development penalties, that proprietary corporate data cannot flow freely across every tier of the race team. Here is the kicker: that firewall cuts right through the driver debrief room. In normal team operations, a driver sits down with performance engineers, telemetry specialists, and simulation coordinators. They cross-reference real-world throttle traces, brake pressure curves, and yaw angles directly against the team's predictive tire models and computational fluid dynamics correlations. It is an open ecosystem where the driver sees how every change to the vehicle model impacts track performance. Under Toyota's strict structural quarantine, that ecosystem is cut in half. The proprietary vehicle modeling algorithms, advanced kinematic simulations, and predictive aerodynamic datasets generated within Toyota Gazoo Racing's Cologne facilities are locked down. The race drivers receive strictly curated outputs, basic setup sheets, ride height targets, and fundamental balance parameters. They are deliberately locked out of the underlying raw predictive modeling pipelines. Think of it like being handed a smartphone without an operating system menu. You can tap the screen and make a call, but you have no idea how the underlying code is routing your voice or draining your battery. For a driver like Esteban Ocon, who built his entire reputation on microscopic technical obsession, this is a psychological shock collar. Ocon is famous, and occasionally infamous, for demanding access to every single telemetry byte. He sits for hours tearing apart corner entry overlays to find 0.02 of a second. Now, he is being told that entire tranches of vehicle dynamics simulations are classified corporate property. Put yourself in the shoes of a rival team principal like James Vowles or Andrea Stella. If you saw an independent team suddenly backed by a corporate giant using black box simulation setups that drivers cannot even legally view during FIA cross-examinations, would you lodge an immediate formal protest with the World Motorsport Council? The operational reality inside the garage reveals just how jarring this split is. Take a standard Grand Prix Friday. Between Free Practice 1 and Free Practice 2, setup adjustments happen at blinding speed. Engineers run track telemetry against real-time driver-in-the-loop simulator rigs running back at the factory. In Ferrari's setup, or Mercedes' facility in Brackley, the correlation loop is direct and instantaneous. The track data feeds the server recalculates suspension kinematics, and the driver sees the comparative delta on an engineering monitor within 15 minutes. At Haas, the pipeline now resembles an international customs checkpoint. Telemetry logged from the VF26, or its predecessor on track, must first be scrubbed of third-party Ferrari component IP, since Haas still purchases its power unit, gearbox, and rear suspension from Maranello. That sanitized telemetry is then routed to Toyota's computational clusters in Cologne. Toyota's proprietary software crunches the raw data, runs structural load analysis, and evaluates chassis flex under high aerodynamic load. Toyota's corporate legal team insists on absolute separation between their commercial automotive research and Haas's trackside personnel. Why? Because Toyota is running their own parallel testing and engineering programs. If proprietary data bleeds across that perimeter, Toyota risks exposing its internal technological secrets to third-party contractors and rival suppliers. The result is an administrative bottleneck. The driver sits on the pit wall, staring at simplified telemetry traces, while the deep mechanical insights remain locked behind enterprise-grade security permissions. Ayao Komatsu is caught right in the crosshairs. Komatsu is a pure track engineer by trade. He made his name as a no-nonsense race engineer who relies on raw numbers, direct feedback, and extreme transparency. When Gene Haas elevated him to team principal following Günther Steiner's exit, Komatsu's entire mandate was efficiency, cut the politics, maximize the machinery. Now Komatsu has to manage a fractured operational framework. On one side, he has Ferrari providing the beating mechanical heart of the car. On the other side, he has Toyota providing the manufacturing backbone and simulation muscle. And trapped in the driver's seat, he has Esteban Ocon, a driver who requires absolute trust and total technical clarity to deliver his peak performance. Ocon's career has been defined by high-friction environments. His stints alongside Sergio Perez at Force India and Pierre Gasly at Alpine were marked by intense internal rivalries, mechanical disputes, and razor-thin margins. Ocon does not rely on raw natural instinct alone. He works like a machine. He compensates for pure car deficits by outworking, out-analyzing, and out-studying everyone around him. Strip that analytical access away, and you disarm him. Imagine bringing a knife to a 200-mile-per-hour gunfight, only to find out your team locked your whetstone inside a safe in Germany. That is Ocon's current reality. When the car understeers through a high-speed apex like Turn 9 at Barcelona, Ocon cannot simply sit with the simulation engineers to redesign the virtual roll center. He has to submit feedback into a one-way ticketing system and wait for an approved corporate output. Think about this from an engineering standpoint. Can a Formula One team genuinely compete for top 5 finishes when their lead driver is restricted from interacting directly with the primary technical facility developing the car's structural simulation models? Let me know where you stand on that balance. The human cost of this operational friction is massive. Gene Haas has run this team on a shoestring budget since 2016. The entire Haas business model was designed to challenge the traditional constructor paradigm. Buy everything the regulations allow from Ferrari, outsource chassis production to Dallara, and keep trackside headcount minimal. It was lean, aggressive, and cheap. That model hit a dead end when the ground effect regulations arrived. Ground effect aerodynamics demand constant, high-speed iteration. You cannot build a modern floor based on delayed data. You need immediate structural manufacturing capabilities and round-the-clock computational simulations. Haas had reached a crossroads: invest tens of millions of dollars into their own massive standalone factory, or find an industrial partner willing to foot the bill. Toyota stepped into that void. For Toyota, this partnership is the ultimate low-risk, high-reward gateway back into Formula One. They get active track testing, staff training, aerodynamic validation, and high-performance manufacturing experience without spending $500 million building an independent engine program or fielding a standalone team. It is a python slowly swallowing a rabbit. Toyota gets the structural integration, while Haas gets the engineering hardware. But in that transaction, the culture of Haas is getting dismantled. For years, Haas was the classic racing dive bar of the paddock. Rough around the edges, chaotic, fiercely independent, and operating on raw gut instinct. With Toyota's integration, that dive bar is being converted into a sterile, highly restricted corporate boardroom. Protocols replace hallway conversations. Secure portals replace open whiteboards. Esteban Ocon and rookie Oliver Bearman are the first drivers forced to navigate this corporate transformation. Bearman, fresh out of the Ferrari Driver Academy, is used to structured systems, but he still relies heavily on raw coaching data. Ocon, however, is an established Grand Prix winner. He signed a multi-year contract under the promise that Haas was building a serious, integrated project around him. Instead, Ocon finds himself isolated from the foundational data streams that dictate how his car will evolve over the next 3 seasons. When a car has a fundamental aerodynamic instability, like the sudden rear axle disconnects Haas suffered from 2022 through 2024, the driver's ability to communicate directly with structural composite engineers is critical. Under this lockdown structure, Ocon must communicate through layers of project managers. He speaks to his race engineer, who speaks to Haas technical leadership in Banbury, who then interfaces through a secure data channel with Toyota engineers in Cologne. By the time that loop closes, days have passed. Rival midfield teams are watching this breakdown with predatory interest. Williams, Alpine, and Audi Sauber are investing hundreds of millions to bring all their engineering assets under single, unified roofs. In Grove, James Vowles tore down antiquated spreadsheet workflows to ensure drivers and aerodynamicists share the exact same computational language in the same building. Haas is moving in the exact opposite direction. They are dividing their brain across 3 different countries: Banbury in the United Kingdom, Maranello in Italy, and Cologne in Germany. Consider the common assumption that more corporate backing always equals more speed on track. If the lines of communication between the cockpit and the factory are fragmented by legal firewalls, does enterprise manufacturing actually produce a faster race car? The technical ripple effects go even deeper when you look at testing regulations. Under the testing of previous cars rules, teams use 2-year-old machinery to evaluate young talent and test mechanical setups. Toyota's partnership allows Haas to utilize Cologne's specialized test benches and driver-in-the-loop facilities to run these programs at scale. During these private test programs, proprietary telemetry collection is heavily scrutinized. Toyota runs specialized sensor packages that measure stress fractures, thermal decay, and high-frequency vibrations. But because of the joint venture restrictions enforced by the FIA's cost cap monitoring group, the raw data gathered from those experimental sensor arrays cannot simply be handed over to the Grand Prix race drivers for personal performance optimization. The data belongs to the corporate entity that manufactured the test bench. The driver gets track time, but the deepest analytical takeaways remain locked within the supplier's proprietary vault. For a driver trying to adapt his braking profile to a new aerodynamic concept, this is pure torture. You leave a test session, knowing the car did something unexpected, knowing the sensors captured every microscopic millimeter of suspension travel, but you are barred from analyzing the underlying mathematical model that explains why it happened. This dynamic creates an atmosphere of paranoia. In Formula One, information is survival. When an athlete feels that engineers are withholding datasets, even if the restriction is mandated by strict FIA compliance and enterprise IP protection, trust erodes. Ocon has spent his career fighting for legitimacy on the grid. He does not have billionaire family backing or a corporate seat guarantee. He survives purely on his results, his work ethic, and his speed. Being trapped inside a cockpit where half the car's development brain operates behind a digital security wall puts his reputation directly on the line every time he drops the visor. If the car fails to perform, the driver absorbs the public blame. Commentators do not analyze corporate data sharing agreements or firewall policies between Cologne and Banbury. They look at the timing screen. If Haas qualifies in the bottom 5 because trackside setup failed to correlate with factory models, it is Ocon's market value that takes the hit. This data ban represents a massive shift in how satellite operations function in elite motorsport. The era of the purely independent racing team is dead. To survive the modern cost cap and ground effect complexity, privateer squads are forced to lean on global automotive giants. Those industrial giants do not operate on racing romanticism. They operate on corporate risk management, legal firewalls, and intellectual property protection. Haas secured the manufacturing resources they desperately needed to survive. But in signing that deal, they accepted an operational reality where their drivers are no longer at the center of the engineering loop. They have the factory, they have the supercomputers, and they have the corporate backing. But the men behind the wheel are driving blindfolded through the data streams that determine their destiny. Here is the question that will define Haas's next 3 seasons. Can Ayao Komatsu bridge this technical divide before the frustration inside the cockpit detonates the entire team dynamic? Or will Toyota's corporate firewall turn Esteban Ocon's high-stakes gamble into a complete career dead end? Drop your take in the comments below. Let's debate.